Hi guys, so I wanted to make a video today about basic economics and how they work because a lot of people on the left side of the political spectrum have a hard time dealing and understanding with how the economy works. So I'm going to just give a brief overview of what I think goes into the economy and how it came to be and how it was created. So fundamentally, the economy is just humans interacting and trading their labor, right? You know, since I don't know the beginning of hunter gatherers, you had a guy that found some meat, or you had a guy that found some apples, or you had a guy or a girl that did something right. It did some kind of labor. That person used resources or used their bodies to do something that is a net positive for somebody else. So when people do these things, aka labor, right? The most natural thing to think about is that, oh, I did this, so it's mine. As in, like, let's say you found some apples, right? And you've been hunting for these apples. You've been searching far wide. Like, you've been starving for ages. Like, your tribe could never find food. And you've just been exhausting yourself trying to find it. And then you finally find these apples. Imagine if a neighboring tribe who sent nobody to find apples just casually asks you to take from the batch you found, right? Before you even feed your own people, right? Let's say this neighboring tribe is like, "Oh, you found these apples, right? You should feed us too, even though we didn't do any labor to try to find it, right?" Obviously, you're gonna feed your people first, right? Especially if you're enemies, right? You're never gonna just give out your food and give out the stuff you made to other people. So essentially, that's what the economy is, right? You labor and then you get something from that labor, right? And the way modern economies are is that different humans do different types of labors and then we all trade with each other. So let's say this kind of human is really good at picking apples and then this kind of human is really good at making bread. We both specialize in what we're good at and then we trade depending on what we value. So trading is the biggest aspect of economics in general and just modern economics because one human can't do it all, right? You can't have, let's say in a modern sense, one human be the electrician, the plumber, the TV repair guy, the auto engineer. You can't have one human doing everything, right? So every human specializes. And through specialization, we're allowed to make more goods efficiently, as in like a really good like bread maker will make a lot of bread and for a lot more people as opposed to like a bad person at making bread making shitty quality bread for not that many people. Sorry for cursing. And this specialization is what leads to trades because at a micro level specialization happens, but also at a macro level some countries are better at doing one thing than another thing. So through specialization, countries create the goods that they're good at producing and they trade. So the same fundamentals apply on a micro and a macro level. And what determines how you value labor, as in like this is a big problem. Let me put a caveat. This is a big problem people don't understand, especially when they talk about minimum wage and fair wages and a living wage, is that people don't understand that the value of labor is not derived by what you feel that your labor is worth. As in like, let's say I'm throwing rocks at the ground. That's technically labor, right? I'm doing something. Every time you do something is labor. Doing something is fundamentally labor, no matter like how unproductive or productive it is, right? Let's say I'm banging on a wall. That's technically labor. If somebody pays me to bang on their wall for 8 hours a day, that's labor. Like it doesn't matter. But obviously in the real world, nobody is gonna pay you to bang a wall or bang their wall because there's no demand for it. So what you're worth is what the market or the people outside that are not you demand for that kind of labor. So let's say you have this minimum skill job, right? And then it's in demand because people want to hire you for it. But if you can hire a lot of people, right? If there's a big supply for that job, you don't really have to pay a high wage because like a a lot of people are able to do the same task. So there's not really any competition. That's a really fundamental thing that drives wages up. Demand and supply. That's literally, if you take an intro to economics course, that is literally the most important thing you need to learn. There's demand and supply for everything in life. Labor, goods, contracts, debt, like everything is supply and demand. Like if you have more of something, it's worth less. If you have less of something, it's worth more. It's the same thing with like rare gems, right? They have no intrinsic value. You have a piece of gold. Can you eat the gold? What can you do with that piece of gold except that it's rare? So human beings have essentially traded their labor, and the way they interact, as in like, and the way they make a standard value for their labor is through having some kind of like currency system, or putting the same value in the same kind of items. As in, like, let's say you have two tribes, right? And then they create their own goods because they're really good at doing those goods, right? How do they exchange goods in a way that they can both value something that the other one does? So let's say tribe A wants to buy toilet paper from tribe B, and then tribe B wants to buy salt, I guess. It's gonna get to a point where having a ratio between items, as in like, oh, two rolls of toilet paper equals 1 grain of salt, or whatever. Like, I'm just making it up, right? You can't have a ratio for every item. You can't have, 2 liters of Coke equals 1 Rolex watch. You just can't have that. You need to have like a unit where everybody can agree, this is how we're gonna assert value to the things we produce. And that's where the whole currency market comes into play. Each tribe, aka each country, has its own form of that valuation for the goods they produce internally. So Americans have the dollar, Europeans have the euro, blah blah blah. So that's gonna help that. So now that we have that in mind, the point of the economy is for people to trade goods and to trade labor. That's fundamentally how it works. And one big aspect of the economy that people just really don't understand fundamentally about how our economic system works, it's the free market. So you hear the term free market a lot. It's kind of a buzzword, but it's a real thing. So essentially what the free market is that two humans can trade or can do any kind of service or give each other any kind of good without the intervention of some other third person or third party. So a person from tribe A and a person from tribe B can exchange goods without the leader of whichever tribe telling them, no, you can't do that because I don't like the way or the ratio that you're trading items, or I don't like the other tribe, so I don't care if the good is cheap or whatever, I don't want you to have it. So the free market essentially, in its essence, is allowing humans to interact and trade labor freely without any kind of regulation or government telling them that you can't or cannot do something. And that system is the system that has let humans develop in the past 500 years, essentially. So we don't have a complete free market, right? Because you can't just, trade with China and then just ignore whatever the government has tariffed, right? You can't just pay whatever you want, there's regulations are what stops the free market from being free. So the free market is kind of in a spectrum, right? You can have a complete free market, which is complete anarchy, which is just humans interacting with other humans and then government doesn't exist, right? Or you could have a completely anti-free market system, which is basically what communism is, right? Which is, whatever labor I produce, I have no control over whatever I do. When a government entity has complete control of the goods and services you produce and who you can trade that with, that is essentially what socialism/communism wants. So if good people, right, good-natured people, They fundamentally want human beings to be as free as possible, to be able to do and follow whatever ambition they want as long as it's not harming other people, right? So as long as I don't harm other people, why can't I buy goods from this country at a cheaper rate because I'm friends with the guy who owns it, right? Like, but essentially, like, it gets more complicated, but because we have to go in terms of tariffs and, protectionism, and that's for another video. But essentially, the free market is what has allowed humans to produce things efficiently and trade them in the market efficiently. So those are kind of like the fundamentals of the economy. So now going to the real world. In the real world, we don't have gold or silver or, we don't have this one arbitrary good as a currency measure. We have fiat currency, and fiat currency is basically just a worthless piece of paper that the government considers legal tender. And what that means is that if the government wanted to just print more money, like a monopoly, you can just make more money, right? It can do that, and it would be legal tender in the country. So it's the whole value that fiat currency has is that we trust the government to create a currency and a valid medium of exchange between the people inside that country. And I'll touch on fiat currency a little bit more later because it has created a lot of problems, and it's one of the hidden causes for a lot of the grievances liberal people have with modern capitalism. A second thing about the reality is that I didn't touch on property, right? I touched on it a little bit, but I didn't explicitly mention property. So private property is one of the key tenets to economics/capitalism. When I mean economics, I'm really talking about capitalism, right? Because I'm not talking about socialism or like communism or whatever. So private property essentially means you keep your own labor, right? So it's intertwined with that free market idea where if I went and found those apples, I keep them, right? Because I did the work to attain those apples. And the person from the other tribe that didn't do the work doesn't have a claim. And most humans naturally have a reaction to when people try to take things that they did. So let's say you found some seeds, you planted a tree, it grew, it created fruit. You as a humans are selfish by nature. It's like we're programmed to be selfish because resources in the wild are scarce. When we were hunter-gatherers, resources were scarce, right? So if you find clean water, you want to keep it for yourself and your tribe, right? Because who knows when the next time you're going to find clean water is. So humans value private property fundamentally. I think it's hardwired into your brain. It's like I'm not saying sharing things is a bad thing, right? But because you share things with your friends, right? And you share with your community, etc. But it gets to a point where you can't share with everybody because you don't have unlimited supply of whatever resource you're talking about. So let's say you have a lot of one thing. It's not infinite, right? You can have a lot of something, but it will run out. And humans have unlimited appetites. They're going to want that thing, and they're going to take it and take it and take it until you run out. So at some point, you can't just share something with everybody. No matter how rich you are, you can't just share your wealth or share your goods because you're going to run out. This world is about finite resources, and that is the whole point of private property. So the fact that there are finite resources, I get to keep what I found because first of all, it's not unlimited. And second of all, I labored to get that. The next core tenet about the reality of capitalism, it's that it's the most natural, free, and voluntary system that there is for trading goods. Anything you do in capitalism, fundamentally, you do it voluntarily. Obviously, the reality of it, we pay taxes, so obviously not everything's voluntary, but every interaction you do outside of the ones you are forced to do, like taxes and, anything that has to do with government, essentially, that's why a lot of people are libertarian. Everything is voluntary, right? which shop you buy from, you get to pick. Which person you get to talk to, you get to pick. Which person you get to trade with, you get to pick. Everything is voluntary. Nobody forced you to do anything. A lot of people have a problem with expensive colleges and, oh my God, colleges are so expensive and I'll never be able to afford it. But the thing is, people don't understand. College is a voluntary transaction. You choose to pay $60,000 or more a year, right? You could, go to vocational training or do any other kind of job. You don't need to go to college because we live in a voluntary system, right? Because people force you this idea that you need to get this thing or you need to have this good. At the end of the day, you make the last decision, right? You, in a voluntary system, the individual makes the final say, unless somebody has a gun pointed to your head, which again, libertarians think that's what the government does. They literally force you to do shit you don't want to do. So capitalism is a voluntary system. And as a side, voluntary systems are the best and most free systems humans can have. When somebody doesn't force you to do something, you can do whatever you want. And that's freedom. Humans want freedom. Throughout all of history, we fought for that. We fought for the fact that we don't want our king forcing us to do X or Y. We want to voluntarily do what we want and what we think is best for ourselves and for our country, for our family, etc. And these are basically the core tenets of what makes capitalism the best system humans have created. And I think it's the only system we can have because we treat the free market essentially is just the will of every human in the world interacting with each other. So it's the purest system we can have because the will of everybody is amassed into a whole, right? If humans weren't hardwired to value private property and like being voluntary, freedom is one of those things we also value. That is all reflected in our capitalist system. Any other system that advocates for more authority and more control and more regulation, it's an involuntary transaction and it's against human nature. And I'm going to finish this video, and the last things I'm going to talk about is the problems a lot of people have with capitalism and why they're seeking alternatives and the whole millennial socialism thing. So the core problem that people have in the left and in the right, honestly, both sides, it's not really a political thing. It's just a problem we all have. Things are getting too expensive and we don't have, the wage to pay that. Our purchasing power becomes less and less every year. And that is a great grievance. That is something that fundamentally, it doesn't make sense to like a layman, right? Why is my money worth less every year? Like nobody really knows, right? It's money, right? I'm doing the same labor. It should be worth the same. If I'm getting paid the same salary over the same years for doing the same job, shouldn't it be always worth the same? Well, not really, because we have things called inflation and increasing cost of living. So inflation happens when it's complicated. It's a complicated issue. I don't really want to, spend an hour talking about inflation, but essentially inflation means when prices go up. And that usually happens when there is more of a currency in circulation. So let's say at a fundamental level, there's only $500,000 for everybody in the US, right? Essentially, all the prices would be fixed. If it was the same amount of money, fixed, like the money supply was fixed, goods would never change price, right? Because it would take the same amount of labor to acquire that good that you want to buy. So let's say in that $500,000 system where the currency is fixed, an apple would be worth 2 cents or even less, like 1 cent, because relative to the money supply, it's probably worth not much. But let's say I double that money supply, right? That apple that was 2 cents is going to be worth the same amount of labor. So relative to the money supply, now that there's more money, it has to be worth more, right? Because you go from 2 cents to 500,000 to 4 cents and 1 million, because now your money supply increased to 1 million And then for the ratio of labor slash money to money supply, the apple will always be 2 cents to 500 and 4 cents to a million. You get that? You get what I mean? Like the price will reflect the money supply. So if there's more money, things are going to cost more. And people don't understand that, or people don't get to that. And the huge problem, I'm not an expert economist, so I can't give you the solutions, but controlling the money supply is fundamental to controlling prices and to controlling the economy. Like the money supply is the economy, right? Because if you had $1 and a lot of people, you would have to split that dollar or create a lot more dollars. And a growing economy demands more dollars in the money supply, right? Because you need currency for all new people, you need currency to reflect the amount of things we're producing, et cetera, et cetera. So the Federal Reserve is tasked with controlling the money supply. And the Federal Reserve is, I don't want to claim anything as 100%. I could be wrong. Anybody could criticize what I'm saying. But the Federal Reserve is basically the biggest and most culpable entity for any grievance you have with the economy. You could also blame corporations or the government, but essentially the buck stops with the Federal Reserve. They control the money supply, they control prices. So people think that creating laws that limit prices or put a price floor or a price ceiling is really gonna like make life better. You know, it's gonna redistribute income, or et cetera. No, you're getting screwed because the Federal Reserve keeps printing money, accumulating debt. It keeps racing that ratio of money, of like price to money supply, but your wage isn't. And I talked about it in the last video about labor supply and how that affects your wage. That is one huge thing that is a problem, the increasing labor supply, but the money supply is also increasing a lot. So, because think about it, right? People say, oh, inflation is 2%. That you don't really see that, right? When our money supply is huge, 2% is a lot of money. Because 2% when you have little money is not that much. Let's say 2% of 100 is $2, but 2% of 100 million is like what, 20,000, 200,000. You know, it's the bigger the money supply is, the more total dollars a percentage like produces, a small percentage. So like, you think, oh, inflation's low, right? 2%. No, that's a lot of money that's being printed, right? And prices go up and up and up. And it's not just because of the money supply. Prices also go up due to scarcity, they go up because there's like a lack of supply or there's a huge demand. And that's a big problem we have with housing, right? That's another issue a lot of people like in urban areas have, is that, oh, housing is so expensive. But the thing about housing is that housing, it's not a rare good. It's not scarce, as in like, you don't need to go into a mine and dig like a million miles in order to find a house. Creating a house is easy, right? So we could easily lower the cost of housing by just creating more houses. But here's the catch. Here's where regulation is screwing you over. Governments don't want, or investors and the government don't want to create more houses because it devalues the houses that are already built, right? So let's say you put your life savings into a mansion or a house. You don't want the government, or you don't want builders to create another mansion next to yours and then devalue yours, right? So the whole housing issue is demand-sided versus a supply-sided argument. So the rich and the people with houses, basically, not the rich necessarily, but like middle class, upper middle class, they don't want their investments to plummet, right? They want their housing prices to grow because they invested their capital into that house. So they squeeze the supply, as in they stop building more in order for their prices to increase. But if you stop building, newcomers to the market will have to pay a high premium to get the same good that the people who already have houses have. So that is one big issue. And that is a good segue to government regulation. So the more the government regulates, the less free the market is. Because in a fundamentally free market system, if there is a demand for more housing, you build more houses, you increase the supply. If there's more demand, you need to have a supply that matches that demand in order to reach an equilibrium. That's like the idea behind, basic economics. But the government puts their hands on everything, and we can't have all nice things, right? And I'm not gonna debate about what things the government is good at intervening at and what things government is bad at intervening at, because a lot of libertarians obviously think, oh, government sucks at everything. Like I kind of agree, right? Bureaucracy is trash. Bureaucracy is so inefficient. The free market is obviously way more efficient. Voluntary transactions are way better. But so yeah, so the government puts its hands on everything, and a lot of people think that tackling issues from the demand side will fix a fundamental flaw in the economics of an issue. As in, like, people think, oh, if we raise the minimum wage, oh, you're gonna get a fairer, your life will be better, right? That is a huge misconception, because that's a demand side fix to a supply side problem. Your housing problem isn't gonna get better if you earn more money, because the way the market works, for somebody to get paid more, less people have to be working. You need to, in order to have a higher wage, you need less labor supply or less people working. So that's one of the big problems people don't tend to understand, is that, problems are not all demand side, or, oh, the government can just write a law and fix it, right? There's two sides to, every economic issue. There's the demand side, there's the supply side. And that's like basically my gist of what, economics in general are, or is, and what the issues a lot of people have with it. I'll talk about a little bit more about the issues. But I think I already mentioned the whole, like, fair wage. Fair wage is basically the biggest issue people have in the current system, because if companies were making a lot of money, but people had good wages and good purchasing power, because good wages is relative, right? Making $100,000 is great in America, but if you're making $100,000 in Zimbabwe, you're poor as hell. So wage is relative. What you really want is for people to have a fair purchasing power. You want humans to be able to purchase fundamental goods without, having to be a headshot at some big corporate bank. So essentially, you want the middle class to be able to afford basic goods. And let's say we pass a minimum wage law where people are getting paid $100,000 a year. What does that mean if inflation skyrockets, right? $100,000 would have less purchasing power. So what we want is for people to be able to purchase goods, regardless of what the minimum wage is, regardless of whatever inflation or whatever the value's worth, or whatever the dollar's worth, I mean. So we want people to buy more goods, and the best way to get people to be able to afford more goods is to produce more of that good. I personally think, I don't know if, I'm not a PhD economist, I'm just a young adult making a video, but I think if we create more of the good people want at a lower price, fundamentally they'll be able to afford it without having to raise their wage. And that's supposedly what the free market is supposed to do, but we have a huge cesspool of government intervention which prevents us from creating more medicine or building more houses or doing anything from the supply side that would feed that growing demand that the growing population of the US demands. So to end it with that, I just wanted to give a brief overview of what economics is and how it all ties up to our current problems. A lot of people think that, just like this is the last thing I'll say, a lot of people think that, oh, if the government intervenes more, problems will become better. Guys, government is the problem. Government intervention, it's what's stopping people from producing more medicine or producing more houses or producing any kind of good that is in high demand and people with decent wages can't afford due to their lack of purchasing power. So I think and I honestly believe that the government is one of the big deterrents in the market's working properly, right? Because the market fundamentally will satisfy every need. So I'll leave it at that. And I hope some young people, or a lot of like, I don't want to call you misinformed because you're not really misinformed and nobody taught you correctly, right? If you never took an economics class, you're never going to learn this stuff. But I hope you guys watch this and, learn a little bit, read a little bit. I'm not saying every system's perfect, but I wanted to kind of highlight the problems of modern capitalism and why more government is not really good, because essentially the government is kind of the problem, but nobody wants to talk about that. Everybody wants to expand government, especially those in power. So I'll keep it at that, and I hope you guys have a good day.